Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Prositi DIY channel, the place where fascinating stories are told with heart. Here, I'll take you through everyday stories, inspiring moments, and sometimes meaningful lessons in life. Let's listen, feel, and share emotions through each story. Don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe to join me on this meaningful journey. Let's get started. Story: The Weight of Concrete, the Whisper of Injustice. The streets of Cedarville were a familiar tapestry to Maya, a little girl whose small feet knew every crack in the pavement, every turn on the path home. She clutched her backpack tightly, a small box carrying books, dreams, and a sense of normalcy. This routine, this familiar comfort, was her anchor in life. But that day, the air felt different, heavy with an unspoken tension. It was as if the very concrete beneath her feet hummed with an unsettling energy. Then it tore through the silence. The blare of a police siren, harsh and immediate, a rip in the fabric of normalcy. A patrol car, a blue and white Predator, abruptly braked right at the threshold of her world. The man inside, Officer Kalin, was a monolith of authority, his face a mask of hard lines and cold indifference. His eyes locked onto Maya like a vice, crushing the innocent calm of her journey with their intensity. "Hey, you there! What are you doing here alone?" His voice, gruff and accusatory, was a slap in the face, loud enough to echo off the surrounding buildings. Maya froze, her breath caught in her throat. This was her street, her path, her daily rhythm, but suddenly it felt hostile, forbidden. Fear, a cold, damp hand, gripped her heart tightly. She tried to speak, to explain that she was just on her way home, but the words caught, strangled by his sheer aggression. He didn't wait, he didn't listen. He was a man on a mission. His purpose already decided. The metallic clink of steel as he pulled handcuffs from his belt, the cold decisiveness of it, sent a shiver through her. His grip, when he seized her wrist, was an invasion, a painful intrusion into her very being. "You're under arrest," he barked, his voice a punch to the fragile shell of her composure. She looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and terror, the world around her tilting. The sidewalk seemed to spin. The buildings blurred into a chaotic mess of shapes and colors. She was trapped, a creature in a nightmare. Whispers swirled around her, a chorus of disjointed voices, some sharp with judgment, others soft with hesitant pity. Phones were raised, capturing her ordeal as if it were a spectacle of horror. She was a small boat caught in a raging storm. What had she done? What crime had she committed to deserve such treatment? How had her normal life, her simple existence, been so violently shattered, thrust into the dark abyss of inexplicable terror? Where could she turn? Who would believe her? Who would stand up against this towering figure of authority, this self-proclaimed arbiter of justice? Maya's heart pounded wildly in her chest, a frantic drumbeat of panic. The sun, which had been warm just moments ago, now felt cold, a distant memory replaced by the icy terror that had sunk its frozen claws into her very soul. She looked at the officer, his face still a rigid mask, and tried to speak, to reason, to make him understand. I'm just on my way home," she stammered, her voice trembling, barely audible over the thundering beat of her own heart. He stepped closer, his shoes pressing into the pavement with deliberate force, as if each step was a nail hammered into the coffin of her innocence. "Don't mess with me," he growled, his eyes narrowing, as though peeling back the layers of her being, searching for guilt that simply wasn't there. "You think you can just wander around like this without answering for it?" Her mind spun, struggling to comprehend the accusation, to reconcile the reality of her everyday life with this terrifying distortion. Why was he speaking to her like this? She had done nothing wrong, absolutely nothing, to warrant such an attack. Instinctively, she shrank back, pulling her small frame inward, clutching the straps of her backpack as if they were lifelines. She wanted to run, to disappear, to become invisible. But her legs refused to obey, rooted to the pavement as though she were a tree trapped in a storm. Before she could utter another word, he grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh with a force that sent a sharp sting shooting through her body. "You're coming with me," he declared, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Suspicious activity." The words hung in the air, a sinister echo that seemed to ensnare her, binding her in a web of baseless accusations. She was shoved into the back of the patrol car, the metallic smell of the interior, a stark contrast to the familiar scent of the streets. The leather seats, usually a symbol of authority, now felt alien and hostile, like the rigid coldness of her own fear. The handcuffs, the brutal shackles of the law, bit into her wrists, a constant reminder of her captivity. She could see the officer in the rearview mirror, his gaze fixed on her, filled with a contempt she couldn't understand, couldn't begin to fathom. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and painful, but she blinked them back, determined not to let him see her fear. Don't cry, she thought. Don't give him the satisfaction. She clenched her fists, trying to steady her trembling body, trying to find some strength within herself amidst the chaos. She thought of her mother, waiting at home, perhaps worried about her being late. The thought clenched her heart like a fist. Across the street, she noticed a small crowd beginning to gather, their whispers creating a low, uneasy murmur. Then a young woman, her face full of concern, stepped forward, raising her phone as if recording the scene as evidence. She spoke up, her voice shaky but resolute. This isn't right. Her eyes met Maya's for a brief moment, and in that fleeting, almost imperceptible connection, Maya felt a spark of hope, a flicker that perhaps she wasn't entirely alone in this nightmare. The police station was a cold, efficient place, a complete contrast to the warmth and familiarity of her home. She was led through dimly lit, echoing hallways, the air heavy with sterility and indifference. The muffled voices behind closed doors felt distant and unreal, like the very sense of normalcy she had lost. She was placed in a small, barren room and forced to sit on a hard metal chair. "Stay put," the officer barked, his voice devoid of empathy, devoid of any trace of humanity. She sat motionless, her hands still trembling, her mind spinning with confusion and a growing sense of dread. Every sound was amplified in the silence, the rustling of papers, the clinking of keys, each noise making her flinch, a reflex of extreme anxiety. The minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. When the silence became unbearable, the door creaked open and a woman stepped in. She had short, black hair and a calm face, but her eyes carried a firm determination. She sat down at Maya's level, her presence a soothing balm amidst the chaos. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice gentle but clear. "Maya." The girl managed to whisper, her throat dry from fear. "Maya Johnson." The woman nodded, a trace of kindness in her eyes. "Maya, I'm Officer Ramirez. I'm here to make sure everything is handled properly, okay?" Her voice carried a sincerity that Maya hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. But before Maya could respond, the door opened again, and another officer entered. She was older, her presence commanding and authoritative. She didn't introduce herself or offer any explanations, but her eyes fixed on Officer Kalen, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "Kalen, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the tension. Kalen's smug smile wavered, the arrogant confidence retreating from his face. He glanced at the newcomer but didn't move. "What for?" he asked, his tone defensive. The woman repeated herself, her tone leaving no room for argument. Maya watched as Kalen, with a reluctance that was almost palpable, followed the woman out of the room, the door slamming shut behind them. The woman turned to Officer Ramirez, and they exchanged a silent glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Officer Ramirez turned back to Maya, her face soft with empathy. "Listen to me, Maya," she said, sitting in the chair beside her. "The officer who brought you in here, he's under investigation. This shouldn't have happened to you." Maya blinked, her fear momentarily replaced by a flicker of confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Officer Ramirez hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Kalen has a history of misconduct. We're working to hold him accountable. But what happened today is part of a bigger problem." For the first time since she had been dragged into the station, Maya felt a glimmer of trust, a fragile sense that someone, somewhere, believed her, that someone, somewhere, was on her side. The door opened again, and the commanding officer stepped inside. "Ramirez, can you step outside with me?" she asked. Ramirez glanced at Maya, her eyes carrying a silent promise. "I'll be back," she said before stepping into the hallway. Maya was left alone again, her thoughts spiraling. She didn't fully grasp the gravity of what was unfolding around her, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. This experience wasn't just about her. It was about something much larger, much more insidious. It was about a system that was supposed to protect, but had failed her in a profound and shocking way. Yet, for the first time, she realized she wasn't entirely powerless. She could sense the slightest shift as voices began to rise against the injustice she had endured. The story wasn't over. Her ordeal was just the beginning. New stories would continue to emerge, revealing shocking truths as courage confronted corruption, as a small voice refused to be silenced. Maya sat quietly, staring at the cold, sterile floor of the police station, her heart still heavy with a burden. Yet something had changed. The paralyzing fear that had gripped her earlier was giving way to a tentative spark of hope. She had seen the cracks in the system, how power could be distorted and abused, and how easily bystanders could choose to look away. But she had also glimpsed something else. People who cared, people willing to act, people ready to fight for what was right. She began to understand that her voice mattered, even if it felt small and insignificant. She wasn't merely a victim of circumstance, but part of a larger narrative, one of resilience, defiance, and the unyielding power of hope. Officer Ramirez returned, her face bright with a reassuring smile. She promised to make things right. Maya felt a small flicker of strength growing within her. Later, as she stepped out of the station under Ramirez's protection, the air seemed lighter, the world slightly less harsh. She looked up at the sky, the colors of the sunset painting a breathtaking masterpiece, a reminder that even the darkest moments would pass and that there was still beauty even amidst the shadows. Maya didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew, with newfound clarity, that she would never see the world the same way again. Her story, her trauma, would serve as a stark reminder that silence sustains injustice. But courage, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, can create change. Change within herself, within her community, and perhaps even in the world. Her story is a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit and to the urgent need for all of us to stand against any injustice we witness around us. She is a reminder that change begins with a single courageous act, that one voice, no matter how small, can make a tremendous difference, especially when joined by others. The journey continues. The fight for justice carries on. And as we continue to witness stories of injustice and the resilience of those who face it, may we never grow immune to the cries of the silenced and the courage of those who choose to speak out. With every small victory for truth and justice, the power of hope grows, and the light of courage burns brighter than ever before. Don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe to join me on this meaningful journey.